When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello guys. So, welcome back to part 2 of my Grand Maester conspiracy, also named The Killing of the Dragons, which is straight off ripped up. It's just straight up ripped from Fire and Blood, because that's the chapters of A Dance with Dragons, basically. But I like it, so we're going to go with it. Also, if you guys are new here, subscribe. More content like this pretty much every week. This is just one part of a series. Also, if you have not seen part 1, I would strongly advise you go back to part 1. It has a lot of the context for this video, as this video will start to get into the Dance with Dragons and a little bit more of the build-up and the inevitable death of Viserys, leading to the blacks and the greens going at it. A lot of dragons, dying. And the Maester's kind of weaving, they're poisons in the background, just getting rid of the dragons, in my opinion. So, let's get into this video. I hope you all enjoy this, and let's get into it. So, getting into part 2, I wanted to touch on something that we left off with in part 1, was that in the decision to make Rhaenyra married to Laenor Velaryon. Now, remember, Laenor is widely accepted as being gay. Like, most people think he's gay. It's kind of like a Loras Tyrell situation where most people have that suspicion. Well, maybe not most people, but like most of the decently smart people know he's got something else going on. Was the truth with Renly as well. And the funny part is Rhaenyra was not actually consulted about who she was to marry. She was told by Viserys that you are going to marry Laenor. That's it. You don't get a choice. That's who you have to marry. And when Rhaenyra pushed back on this idea, saying, that he's, gay, he's not going to be able to, reproduce with me, Viserys goes ahead and says, if you don't do this, I will put Aegon in line for the heir. If you don't know who Aegon is, this is the first child of Viserys and Alicent. So Alicent is Viserys' second wife. Rhaenyra is from his first wife. Directly after this, we get this long kind of page and a half where it's really the Maester's trying to picture Rhaenyra and or like the Septon and Mushroom, that Rhaenyra was kind of in a lot of distress at this point and wanted male companionship. We start off with them saying that Rhaenyra went to Criston Cole, who was basically her personal knight, was always there for her at this point. And we have multiple conflicting stories that it wasn't Rhaenyra that went to him, it was Cole, or it was, Rhaenyra that was, wanting him, and Cole said no. We have mixed things going on there. But we know that after this, that Criston Cole never really was on Rhaenyra's side ever again. He was definitely a green supporter after the situation. Now, we don't know what happened. We have no factual evidence to support either side. I would like to think that this is Criston Cole going to Rhaenyra, because I feel like Rhaenyra at this point, she's been very smart in my opinion, and understands her value at this point. I just don't understand why she would go to Criston Cole. I think Criston Cole, this is more him going for her, knowing that she is going to be married off, and trying to get her when she is in a vulnerable state of mind. But again, this could be quite the opposite. We're not sure. I'm just giving you guys my opinion on it. Then, it apparently is said that Rhaenyra went to Harwin Strong. Now, again, this is difficult because we don't know what really happened between her and Harwin Strong. We don't know if she went to him or what happened. But this is something that's going to be a big plot line going forward until the start of the Dance with Dragons, because Harwin Strong has very distinct, characteristics. Harwin Strong, you can really do it's kind of, they really do something where it's like Robert Baratheon in the current story, where he's got this darker, hair, he's very, he's a bigger dude, he's muscular and stuff. And as you'll see, when Rhaenyra later on has her children, they kind of look like Harwin Strong. And they don't really have a lot of the Targaryen features, which we'll talk about later. But you see how this sets up everything going on. Rhaenyra, if she's given a suitable match, none of this ever happens. And we know that all of this is started by a Maester. A Maester suggests that Rhaenyra should be marrying this dude who they all know is gay. It makes me think that the Maesters, knowing this would happen, knowing Rhaenyra, she's 16, it is completely normal for her to have these urges of wanting male companionship. And she knows she's not going to get it from Rhaenyra. So, we have this idea that the Greens will use for quite a while, that Harwin Strong is actually the father of all these children that Rhaenyra has, and that Rhaenyra is actually mothering bastards. And we get into 114 AC, and Rhaenyra is then married to Laenor Velaryon, and Laenor basically, he's kind of like a Stannis type, where he's there to do his duty every one so often. They definitely don't have any attraction to each other. It's not a warm, loving relationship. And even Laenor goes right back to Driftmark after their marriage. Like, he really is only at court with Rhaenyra when he's expected to be there. You know, if he's not needed there, he's not going to be there. Rhaenyra, this whole time, though, does stay at court. And by the end of the year after they've been married, Rhaenyra gives birth to her first boy, Jacaerys, we're going to say, and his nickname would be Jace. And again, like I said before, Jace does not have any of the Targaryen features. Very much looks like something that will be a common theme in her first 3 children. At around the same time as Rhaenyra gives birth to Jace, Alicent gives birth to Daeron, her 3rd son, or her 4th child at this point, to Viserys. Now, this is where, again, we get into Daemon. He's been kind of missing from the story for a little while. He's been, warring. And Daemon, who has fathered children, he asked to present them to the court, which is a very normal thing that the Targaryens would do. This has been done for I don't know how many years back in the past. And the Maester at this time, the Grand Maester, fights heavily on this. Why, I'm not sure. There's almost no reasoning for why you would... Daemon at this point is way down the ladder. Like, he's way down the ladder of succession. They shouldn't even be worrying about Daemon in that regard. But again, the Maesters just have some bias against Daemon. All he's doing is presenting his children. That is completely normal. And they're getting backlash for it. But Viserys does, give in. He wants to see these children, and he's being a good, a good brother and a good uncle to these children. So, skipping to 117 AC, I decided to skip Rhaenyra on having her second birth to her second child. But I wanted to bring up when her 3rd son, Joffrey Velaryon, is born. Sorry if I'm not saying that right, by the way, because I'm trying my best with pronunciation, but yeah. The Grand Maester, who again is not supposed to be like taking sides, is not someone that's supposed to be like doing things like that, basically straight up hints to the council and Viserys to his face that they are all not Laenors. Now, granted, they probably aren't. But this is not for you to say. You're a Maester. Why are you spreading rumors? It's just such a common trend as I'm going through these books, is that there's just such a bias against Rhaenyra and Daemon, and they will end up getting married, as we'll talk about in this, that it makes so much sense from the Maester's point of view to just discredit them at all points. At every single opportunity they can discredit the two, they do. And it's something that really is something you have to hold on to as we get further into this. Because it'll play a big role when we see the storming of the Dragon Pits later on, and it's a big, big thing. So, 120 AC, it's a really big year for the Targaryens. There's a lot of different things happen, and it's a big year for this plot in general. Now, 120 AC, we start with Laenor dies. So now Rhaenyra is single. She's not married to anyone, and she's free to marry once again. She's probably really happy about this because Laenor was not really that great of a husband. But, later on in 120 AC, Otto Hightower is reinstalled as the Hand. This is huge because we've seen this Hightower growing in strength, and Viserys just blatantly doesn't want to rule the kingdom. And Otto Hightower has been somebody that always likes having all the power and liking making all these decisions. and definitely is somebody who is power hungry. Otto Hightower is somebody that I would almost compare to a Tywin, where Tywin is very good at putting himself with more power and getting his family in a better position. Because you look at what Otto Hightower has done just off being appointed hand for one, point in history. He now has his daughter as the queen. All of her children are in the line of succession. They're not first at this point yet. Rhaenyra is still first and will be until Viserys dies. And you just look at it, how Otto Hightower is gaining power like this. It's big, and it's going to come into play, down the road. Around the end of 120 AC, we have Daemon and Rhaenyra marry. This is huge because, one, both of their, former partners had died this year, right? So they'd only been grieving for about half a year. This is very frowned upon by Viserys. They didn't tell Viserys. They didn't really tell anyone. And this is huge because the Maesters hate both of these characters. Daemon and Rhaenyra. They are both just shit on the entire books. There's nothing really good said about either one of these characters. And it really now becomes the Maesters really want to shut them down. Because now Daemon has leaped the succession quite a bit, right? Marrying Rhaenyra now gives him, he's the king, basically. If Viserys dies, Daemon becomes king and Rhaenyra is queen. That's how that goes. This is the worst possible outcome for the Maesters, and it's a big reason why they were already supporting the Hightowers, that they're going to support them even more when Viserys does die eventually. To end out 120 AC, Rhaenyra ends with having her fourth child born, named Aegon. Now, what's very interesting about Aegon in 120 AC and being born is that he has a lot of the Targaryen features, which goes to show you as the other three children were probably bastards. If you guys wanted to see me do a more of a breakdown of her children, let me know. But I think it's pretty obvious that Rhaenyra wasn't sleeping with Laenor that much, and to the point where Laenor, they have like very Targaryen kind of features. For them to not come out and the strong features to come out, it's very much kind of a parallel to the Baratheon children in The Song of Ice and Fire, where they all ended up being Lannisters because none of them took the dominant Baratheon characteristics that we do see with that line. And the Strongs are very much the same in that regard. So we're going to skip 9 years. Nothing really too big happens between 120 and 129 AC. It's just growing tensions, really. Both sides hate each other with the Greens and the Blacks. The Maesters don't make any real moves in this time period until we have 129 AC. Viserys dies. This is really the start of the Dance with Dragons, and we'll see as really the Greens start out with just trying to cover this up and trying to plan how to pretty much usurp the throne from Rhaenyra. On Viserys' death, we're basically given this. Basically, Alicent tries to keep all this quiet and to give the Greens an advantage. But the next major thing we see with the Maesters is Fire and Blood, who was written by the Maesters. Basically, it's an account of the Maesters. They even call out that the current Grand Maester that's in the council, in his account of it, he is completely biased and tries to make himself look really good. That is something that is very, very odd, that even the Maesters are calling it out, which we will see later on, because we see conflicting storytelling that just doesn't make any sense for how the Maester is telling it, and kind of tells us a little bit more about his motivations and the Maester's motivations in general. So we get to this Green Council, which is formed the night that Viserys is killed. Or not killed, but he dies, basically. And this is basically being assembled to talk about what we're going to do with the kingdom. Now, obviously, this is going to go for Aegon, Alicent, and Viserys' first kid, just because all these people are supporters of the Greens, except for one person who we'll talk about. But with that being said, the Grand Maester tries to say that he walked into this saying, you know, we should send word to Rhaenyra and, you know, let her know and stuff like that. But then we see that in this entire council, which goes on for a good amount of time, for a good amount of hours, as they, you know, determine what they should do, it is said specifically that the only person that spoke on behalf of Rhaenyra was Lord Beesbury, not the Maester. Now, in the Maester, in his account, tries to say that, you know, he was making some of these arguments that Lord Beesbury was making. That's obviously false, because we see what happens to Lord Beesbury once they figure out, okay, he's not loyal to Aegon, or he has some indecision. The Maester obviously was saving face at this point, and it's this manipulation that we're going to see quite often, even getting into the story that we have currently in A Song of Ice and Fire with, you know, Game of Thrones and all that. When I get to some of the later parts, we'll see this exact type, you know, stuff where they try to make themselves look good, and it just doesn't make sense to me. But we get this, obviously, the Maester is on the green side. He's on the Hightower's side, which again makes perfect sense, how we've been talking and stuff like that. And what I think is amazing is the Maester is the person, right, that's supposed to be kind of carrying out, you know, your lord's wishes or your king's wishes. And Rhaenyra is consistently said she is the heir. Nobody else. There's no indecision in Viserys. Maybe he doesn't say it enough. Maybe he wasn't as firm on it and made it as public as he maybe needed to. But he said multiple times that Rhaenyra was the heir. And the Maester does not go through with it. So, we continue on. And we go to Criston Cole. Now, I specifically wanted to bring this up because... So, in the beginning of this video, we talked about how Rhaenyra and Criston Cole had some sort of... They had talked or something right after Rhaenyra basically found out that she had to marry Laenor. And Criston Cole kind of sounds very salty in this council. He sounds like someone that, like, got rejected and is still not over her or something like that. Because he kind of, like, just talks down to her and just is like, oh, well, we don't want Rhaenyra on the throne, you know, because of random reasons, and then basically calls her children's bastards. Like this is public knowledge. Just kind of being really salty and petty, in my opinion. So that is why I really feel like Rhaenyra was the one to not go for Criston Cole, and then went with this, you know, the Strongs, basically. But I just thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to loop back to the beginning of the video. And what I think is really interesting is that by the end of Criston Cole's speech, he says blatantly, like, this is a quote, this is not like they basically give us, you know, context clues. This is quoted by Criston Cole, that we all knew what Laenor was. Because they're talking about how Rhaenyra is going to turn, or Rhaenyra and Daemon basically are going to turn, you know, the Red Keep and stuff into a brothel. Now, with that being said, he then says even the, you know, the guys won't be safe. You know, just, you know, look at, you know, just like Laenor. So if you all knew, and he's talking about all these people in the council right now, the Grand Maester, Otto Hightower, who was the Hand of the King at the time, they all knew he was gay. So why did they marry Rhaenyra to him? It comes back to all these points I've been saying, is that this was a plan. This was a setup. It was a setup to make Rhaenyra's children have this, even if they are bastards, this looming thing that Rhaenyra is not loyal and is kind of a, you know, a slut. It's very interesting that this stuff is specifically said. Now, what I think is funny is, so they go to, like, crown Aegon, and they go to try and find him, right? Because they can't find Aegon to crown him or whatever and tell him what's going on. And when they do eventually find him, he is basically having sex with a girl that's, it's said, is no more than 12 years old. And this whole time we've been being told that Daemon is the sex hungry, you know, he's a bad boy, he's a terrible guy, he would be horrible for the king. And yet the person they're trying to name for the kingdom is having sex with a 12-year-old who he's not married to, and that's big frowned upon by all the high towers and all this that we've been getting throughout the entire stuff with Rhaenyra and Daemon. But here's Aegon doing the exact same thing, and guess what? Not a single thing is brought up about it. Kind of interesting, don't you think? Kind of interesting how we have this double meaning where it's okay for one character, but it's not okay for the next. This just shows you this obvious, blatant trying to smear Daemon. So after, we have this council and basically they're preparing to publicly say that Aegon is going to be the king and basically the starting up of the Dance with Dragons, I just thought this was very interesting to note. A fourth of the treasury is sent to Old Town. So not only have the High Towers basically, gotten to where they are in power in King's Landing, they've also secured a lot of the riches of King's Landing. That is just mind-boggling how much power they've gotten within the last 20 years. Right? You go from just being a hand of the king to now your daughter, right, is the queen. Or she's basically the queen regent, I guess, at this point. And her offspring are the king and queen at this point. While you also collect a good amount of gold from the treasuries of King's Landing. It's all too convenient of how this all adds up to me. And this Maester conspiracy, it just continues, okay? And how I want to finish this video off is basically showing you how staggering the Dance with Dragons was in the killing of the, the dragons in general. At the start, we had 20 living dragons. 9 of these were older, huge dragons. We had 8 that were younger, but they were like, you could still ride them. They just weren't as, vicious or grown as a lot of the other big ones at this point. And then we also had 3 hatchlings. Now, by the end of this, there would only be 3 that would survive. And that's not saying 3 like in control of the Targaryens. That's 3 in general of of dragons left. So as we go into part 3, which will be, going through how all these dragons die and how a lot of, or at least some of them were impacted by the Maesters and the ones that they could get their hands on, it's staggering. And we're also, probably in that video, if we get to it, we'll talk about how the Maesters eventually also just kind of stop more dragons from being repopulated because, as we'll see, there was a lot of dragon eggs that were still left to be hatched. They just never hatch, which is kind of odd. And then we get into, into the story where you see Daenerys' eggs that'll hatch. But yeah, there's a whole big thing. We're going to get into it. This is going to be a long series. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. Like, subscribe, and comment for more of this content. I've been really enjoying this series, and I hope you guys are as well. But yeah, don't be trusting Maesters. They be doing some weird stuff going on right now. Weird stuff.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.